My life was a blueprint. I was an architect in Chicago. I designed clean lines, glass walls, and spaces where every single A/B/C labeled item had a designated place. My world was logical, it was scheduled, and it was 1,000 miles away from the dusty, chaotic mess I'd grown up in. I hadn't been back to Harmony Creek, Iowa, in almost a decade. I'd made it out. I was the one who escaped. Then my father had a heart attack, and my blueprint was set on fire. Suddenly, I was the sole proprietor of Miller's Hardware and Feed. A place that smelled of fertilizer, sawdust, and old metal. A place I had spent my entire adolescence dreaming of leaving. My plan was simple: get in, hire an auditor, liquidate the assets, sell the building, and get back to my real life before my clients in Chicago even noticed I was gone. The first person I saw when I walked through the jangling bell of the front door was a betrayal of that plan. He was standing behind the counter, patiently explaining the difference between two types of wood glue to an elderly woman. He was tall, built solid like the oak beams holding the roof up, and wore a worn canvas work jacket with the name Jake stitched over the pocket. He had a scruff of a beard, kind, tired eyes, and he looked at me with a sad, knowing familiarity. "Ryan," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I was so sorry to hear about your dad." This was Jake Peterson. He'd been my dad's right-hand man for as long as I could remember, the son my dad had always wanted instead of the quiet, bookish kid who just wanted to draw buildings. "Thanks, Jake," I said, my city clothes feeling like a costume in the cluttered aisle. "I'm here to start figuring things out." "Figuring what out?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "The store, the inventory, the estate. I'm hiring an auditor to go through the books so I can get it ready for sale." Jake just nodded slowly, a deep disappointment settling in his features. It made me instantly defensive. "Look, I can't be here," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "This isn't my life. My life is in Chicago." "Right," he said, turning back to his customer. "This was just your dad's life." That one, simple sentence hit me like a bag of concrete mix. The next week was a special kind of hell. The auditor I'd hired, a sleek, pitiless guy from Des Moines, was just as baffled as I was. My dad's books were a series of faded blue ledger notebooks, a spindle of paid invoices, and a cigar box full of IOUs from half the farmers in the county. It was a system built on memory and trust. My system was built on spreadsheets and quarterly reports. I tried to take charge. I started scanning barcodes into a new cloud-based inventory system. It was useless. Half the stuff in the store was too old to have a barcode. It was just boxes of bolts and washers sold by the pound. I was completely, humiliatingly useless. Jake, meanwhile, just worked. He moved through the store like it was an extension of himself. He'd listen to a farmer describe a rattling sound in his tractor, then walk straight into the labyrinthine back room and emerge 2 minutes later with some obscure, $5 part that had been discontinued in 1998. He knew every customer by name, knew their projects, knew their families. He was the living, breathing soul of the place I was so desperate to kill. "How do you do that?" I finally asked him, frustrated, after he'd found a specific hinge for a woman's antique cabinet without even looking. "Do what?" he asked, bagging the hinge. "Just know where everything is, what everyone needs." "I've been working here for 15 years, Ryan," he said, his voice patient, like he was talking to a child. "I paid attention. Your dad taught me." He looked at me. "He tried to teach you, too." I flinched. He was right. I'd spent my youth avoiding this place, hiding in my room with my drafting pencils, seeing my dad's love for this store as a sign of his own failure. A failure to be bigger, to be more. I was lost in my own head, staring at my useless laptop in the store's dusty, wood-paneled office when the call came. It was late, well after closing. It was Mrs. Gable, one of the town's oldest residents, and she was in a panic. Her furnace had died. It was the first real cold snap of the year, and the temperature was supposed to drop into the teens. "I can call a heating company in the morning," I said, already looking up the number. "No, honey," she said, her voice thin and reedy. "I can't wait that long. Your father, he always had the part. A thermocouple for the old pilot light. He always kept one for me." I went out into the dark, cold store. I typed thermocouple into my new inventory system. 0 results found. Of course. I let out a long, frustrated sigh, my breath pluming in the cold air. I was going to have to call him. Jake answered on the second ring. He didn't sound annoyed. He just said, "I'm on my way." He showed up 10 minutes later in his pickup truck. He walked straight past me, into the back room, and to a tall, metal shelving unit. He pulled out a small, dusty drawer marked furnace, old stock. And there it was. A small, 5-inch copper wire. "Mrs. Gable's furnace, right?" he asked. "How did you know?" "'Cause it's the first cold snap. And her furnace is older than God. Your dad always made sure we had one. Come on, we've got to go install it." "We?" I asked. "Yeah, we. You're the owner now, aren't you? Grab a flashlight. You're going to learn how to light a pilot." We spent an hour in Mrs. Gable's damp, spidery basement. Jake didn't just replace the part. He patiently, calmly, showed me how to do it. He put the tool in my hand. He guided my fingers. "No, not that one. The other nut. Lefty-loosey. There you go." When the old furnace finally kicked on with a satisfying whoosh of blue flame, the relief I felt was something my spreadsheets had never given me. Mrs. Gable tried to pay us. Jake just smiled and said, "We'll put it on your account, Mary. You just stay warm." Back in the truck, the silence was different. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was full. "You're good at this," I said quietly, as we pulled up to the dark hardware store. "It's not hard," he said, killing the engine. "You just have to be willing to show up for people." He looked at me, his face lit by the green glow of the dashboard. "This store isn't just a building, Ryan. It's the town's toolbox. It's the place people come when they're in trouble. Your dad knew that. He wasn't just selling hardware. He was selling help." I didn't have an answer for that. We went inside to lock up, and that's when I heard it. A faint hissing sound from the back room. A pipe had burst. In the cold, it had finally given up. Water was spraying from a rusted joint, pooling on the concrete floor, threatening boxes of inventory. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I yelled. My first instinct was to call a plumber, to check my insurance, to create a spreadsheet of the damages. Jake just sprang into action. "Okay, main shutoff is in the back, by the breaker box. Go turn it off. Now." I ran. I found the big, red wheel and cranked it until my hands hurt. The hissing sound stopped. When I got back, Jake was already wading through the puddle with a push broom, diverting the water toward a floor drain. "Get some empty buckets," he ordered. "And the shop vac. And all the old towels you can find." For the next 2 hours, we worked. We were a team. We didn't talk. We just moved and mopped and vacuumed. We saved what we could. We got soaked. We were exhausted. By 3 a.m., the leak was contained. The water was mostly gone. We were both freezing, drenched, and covered in rust-colored grime. "Well," Jake said, slumping against a shelf, "that's one way to learn the plumbing layout." I just laughed, a short, sharp, exhausted bark. "I need a drink." "Your dad always kept a bottle in his desk," Jake said with a small smile. We found it, a half-full bottle of cheap whiskey in the bottom drawer of the old metal desk in the office. We sat there in the musty, wood-paneled room, drinking straight from the bottle, passing it back and forth. And for the first time in my life, I talked. I told him about the pressure of my job, about the sterile, glass and steel world I lived in. And I told him how much I had resented this place. How I'd resented my dad for loving it more than he seemed to love the idea of me leaving it. "He didn't, you know," Jake said softly, his voice rough with fatigue. "He didn't resent you. He was proud as hell of you. He had all your articles from those fancy architect magazines pinned up on the corkboard right behind you." I turned, and there they were, clippings I'd never sent him. He'd been following me, all this time, from a distance. A wave of grief, so sudden and so sharp it stole my breath, hit me. All the grief I had been holding back with spreadsheets and liquidation plans. It just broke. I put my head in my hands, and I started to cry. Not neat, quiet tears, but the ugly, racking sobs of a kid who had just lost his dad. I was mortified. I was in front of this man, this practical, capable stranger who probably hadn't cried since he was a boy. Jake didn't say anything. He didn't pat my back or offer me some empty platitude. He just sat there, a solid, steady presence in the room, and let me be broken. He just stayed. I don't know when I fell asleep. I just remember the overwhelming exhaustion, the smell of old paper and whiskey, and the steady, quiet sound of Jake breathing in the chair across from me. I woke up a few hours later, stiff and cold, on the office's ancient, cracked vinyl couch. Someone had draped a heavy, canvas work coat over me. It smelled like sawdust and Jake. I sat up, my head pounding. The office was empty, but I could hear the familiar jingle of the front door bell and the low murmur of voices. It was 8 a.m. The store was open. I found Jake at the front counter, a fresh coffee in his hand, handing a key to a customer. He looked tired, but he was there. He had never left. He saw me standing there, looking like a wreck, and his face softened. He nodded toward the coffee pot in the corner. "Made you one," he said. I poured a cup, the hot, black coffee a lifeline. I looked around the store at the familiar clutter, the worn wooden floors, the impossible number of tiny drawers. It wasn't a prison. It wasn't a failure. It was a legacy. "I'm not selling," I said, the words surprising me as they came out. Jake stopped what he was doing and looked at me. "At least, not yet," I continued, a new, fragile kind of determination settling in me. "But I can't do this. Not like you can. I don't know how." "Yeah, you do," he said, walking over to me. "You just did. You showed up in the middle of the night. You got your hands dirty. You learned how to light a pilot." He was standing close now, close enough for me to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I can teach you how to fix a pipe," he said, his voice low. "But you've already got the hard part." "What's that?" I whispered. "You're your father's son," he said, and he leaned in and kissed me, and it tasted of coffee and sawdust and the promise of a life I had never, ever planned on.